So I'm here with Nanine Rhinelander and David Holmes, founding members of the Howard County Bird Club. And so what the membership now would like to know is, one day there was no Howard County Bird Club, and then at some point in time there was. How did that come about? David says you are the impetus to get that.
We got tired of driving into Baltimore to the bird walks because it took us an hour to get there, and it meant we had to get up earlier. And I had, well, my last child was born in 67. So by 72, she'd gotten to be, old enough so that I had time to do things. And I went around and asked various bird clubs for their bylaws. And then I sat down and I made a list of the different jobs that we needed to have done, offices. And then from my business school training, I wrote a nice little job description for each one. And somebody, a lawyer, I don't remember who or how, it wasn't anybody I knew, offered his very nice lawyer's office, which was right near the Columbia Mall. And we went there of an evening, and it had been going, it went into the paper. And a bunch of people showed up. And I said, welcome, what we're here for.
Where did you meet?
In this lawyer's office.
Oh, you all met in the lawyer's office.
That was the very first thing. And I don't remember the lawyer. I know I didn't know him, or if I knew him, I hardly knew him at all. Because I was very surprised that they offered their place.
And so David said he was living in Baltimore, and you were just moved to Howard County.
I moved to Howard County the month that you started the bird club.
That was pretty smart of you.
And you were living in Glenelg?
Yes. We've been living in Glenelg since we moved there in 66.
And then, so you brought all these people to the lawyer's office because it was.
I must have put a notice in the paper.
It was fantastic.
Probably the Howard County Times.
And then you started, got together, and did you start then having regular meetings? Is that something you remember?
The first thing we had to do was we had to fill the offices.
Okay.
And that's the interesting thing, was that I went through and I read out the description. And every time I read a description, somebody would raise their hand and say they'd do it.
Just like we do now.
I hope so. And the only thing that wasn't on my list of offices was Ted Van Velzen said, I think we need a bookstore. And I said, that's a great idea. Is there anybody here who wants to run the bookstore? And he says, I will. So we had a bookstore. And then we sat for the next meeting, which was, I don't remember, but I know that we had Chan Robbins as our first speaker. And we had so many people in the room, we decided we needed to get a bigger room.
And so, David, you were saying that you remember meeting at.
Well, the newsletter said we moved to Swansfield Elementary School.
Moved to, from where?
I'm not sure. Somewhere in Oakland Mills.
I think we originally met someplace in Oakland Mills once, and the room was too small. And pretty soon we were at Swansfield, and we were meeting for the field trips over in Oakland Mills too. And then somebody said, well, all the birders are coming from the other side of Columbia, so let's meet at Swansfield there. So then we started meeting in Swansfield.
Okay. And most of your bird trips were all local?
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
That was what was fun.
Yeah, but they were very wide ranging.
All over Maryland and maybe Delaware.
Delaware.
Chincoteague.
Wow.
North Carolina. Then we counted that one, so it got rain. A lot of that one got rained out. But yeah, a lot of Eastern Shore kinds of things, Blackwater and
Bombay Hook.
Yeah, Bombay Hook.
Yeah.
Those were good ones. And
were you having field trips like every month, every week?
We had more, we usually had 2 a month.
Yeah.
2 a month.
And one of them was often local. They had feeder trips.
Yeah, I was,
Which, yeah, and she did a lot of hosting.
they used to come to our house last and I'd give them coffee and donuts.
Yeah, but we just visit people's feeders and see what showed up, you know, in the middle of the winter time. And birding from a kitchen was very comfortable.
I like that.
It was fun. It was
Yeah.
And Nanine, you were the first president of the group?
Yes, I came to the job description and I said, I don't have any job description for the president. I don't know what they do. And they said, you are doing it. And I said, oh, okay. If I'm doing it, I'm doing it.
And you were president for
I hope just 1 year.
what?
Well, because I don't think anybody should
Either.
stay in office more than a year.
Well, it was no more than 2 years. I'd have to look at newsletters again, but you weren't in very long.
And there was now we stay in touch by emails and newsgrams and and text messages. So back then you had a newsletter that went out on a regular basis?
We did. And we used the telephone a lot.
Yeah.
And we had board meetings at somebody's house each month before the regular meeting.
Yeah.
And that was the way it worked. And we were really lucky in the beginning because we had David to lead and Larry, what's his name?
Larry Hood.
Larry Hood was in
Did a
town.
lot of
And
reading.
he was terrific and he was
Yeah.
fun too, besides being that. And then Irv Class showed up and he knew what to do. And then out of the woodwork came Al Geis, who worked in for
Was
Patuxent.
doing research on bird seed and which birds like which seeds and things like that.
And he was
With his
a big
feeder.
expert on turkey calls.
Yeah.
And he also had woodcock in his backyard, so to speak.
Wow.
So he brought us there for the
And we're
woodcock.
still doing woodcock walks in the area because, you know, Middle Patuxent, the environmental areas right across the street from where he lived.
I think woodcocks are one of the most amazing birds I've ever run into. And I think a woodcock walk is really fun. I did not think much of when we would lie on our backs and watch the migrating birds against the moon. Then we did. We went
Yeah.
through a time
Uh-huh.
when we decided to count birds. that were
That started back in the 50s.
So how did the bird club grow? I mean, did you continue advertising in the local papers or word of mouth or
We didn't advertise. We put in, when our
No.
meetings were.
notices in the
Community,
paper?
Yeah,
just
yeah,
the
yeah.
community section of a
Yeah,
newspaper.
Yeah. And
Time.
people who were birders, they're people who want to be birders, people who are birders, people that hadn't had any birding experience but were interested. Do you remember
Mhm.
Marjorie Mountjoy and Elise Say?
Yes, I do.
I'm sure they had never been birding before. And I must have been leading a trip and they came and both of them were dressed in nylon that snagged. And by the time they left the bird trip, they looked like something very strange because all their clothes were,
Tatters.
yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. in
Dear.
tatters. One of them said to me, I think we need to invest in some bird watching gear. And I said, I think that's a good idea.
And did they become good bird watchers over time?
They were
Yeah.
with us for years.
Yes, very
Yes,
nice.
yes, and big supporters,
So did you stay with the bird club for a long time? Were you a member of the bird club for 10 years, 15 years, 20
At least
years?
15. I don't remember what, the late part, but my children were growing up and I was, carrying on a full-time job and I had, one of the problems was I started raising sheep. And the sheep festival at the county fairgrounds was always May count. And that destroyed me on May
Yeah.
count.
And David, you've had a long career doing birding,
Yeah,
banding and what have you. So
banding. I saw in the newsletter that we scheduled a trip to Piscataway where I was working with Kathy Klimkowitz. I don't remember the trip at all. There was no account of it in the paper. I don't even know if it went. But we scheduled it for, I think, the end of March one time. And Piscataway was down south of Washington,
Okay.
across the Potomac from Mount Vernon. And Kathy ran a migration banding station down there, weekends only, for, I don't know how many years. I started working with her in 1970.
She did it for a long time, obviously.
And she was there, well, probably 8 or 10 years, easily.
So when you guys look back now, it's 50 years this club has been going. It's just like your baby birthed this thing, and it's still going.
I don't
haven't
think
been-
so.
Yes, you did.
I'm afraid we keep going with our lives.
Yeah.
I know, but
We're not spending very long time in the past.
No, and of course, I've always been sort of on the periphery of a lot of club stuff because of my work schedule.
right.
I'll make it a point that I can rearrange around if I'm asked to give a program, or at this point the studio is small enough I can lead a few field trips, but I have to have people with me to be able to hear what's going on.
Right.
So
It must be very.
I can do, but it used to be I was teaching at least 6 days a week and often working the 7th.
Must be very frustrating to lose your hearing when you're a birder.
Do you remember
Yeah.
when Chan Robbins lost his hearing? I remember it. Oh, he was just.
Yeah. Well, I remember hearing, I think it was Dave Zilkowski, was with Chan one point at a place and said, Chan, there used to be gnatcatchers here. And Dave had to tell him, Chan, there are gnatcatchers here.
Some birds are just hard to hear.
Well,
Yeah, they
and he lost the high notes
Yeah.
first,
This
Yeah.
is typical male.
and little by little,
Yeah.
And I can remember after the first May count when he told us just how
Yeah.
desperate he felt because he just couldn't do what he used to be
Yeah.
able to do.
That's sad.
Yeah.
Sad for all of us.
Yeah.
So So are you birding out here where you live now? Or do you ever go out and look for birds, or you're just a backyard birder now?
I can't do very long walking anymore. I haven't been able to do long walking for a very long time.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I can get from here to the back garden, and back again, but I couldn't walk a mile if you paid me. Well, actually, about 3 weekends ago, we walked up to Washington Monument.
Ooh.
And
Oh.
that's the first long walk that I have taken in literally years.
Now, did you take your binoculars with you?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I didn't have my binoculars. We went there on the spur of the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
However, we dance at Penmar every Sunday afternoon and during the, from June to beginning of October. And on the way up to Penmar on Rock Raven Road, about, I would say the beginning of September, we were going down the road and all of a sudden I said, Bob, and I do this to get him to stop, and he stopped, and I said, Bob, there's a bald eagle on that bare tree back there, back up. And so we backed up to the bald eagle in the bare tree, and we have our binoculars, but you can't miss a bald eagle.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we went off dancing, and we came back and he was still there.
Oh, wow.
Very
So
nice.
we went very slowly the next weekend, and we came slowly back and he wasn't there. And then the weekend after that, we went very slowly and he was in another bare tree before the one that was out in the open, but it was another bare tree. There he was. And when we came back, he was still there again. And he must fish the big lake at Fort Ritchie. That must be where he's fishing. And I'm hoping he's going to be there in the wintertime. So Bob and I, in the times, you see, we would go there it would be, the dance starts at 2:00. So we would be going by there between quarter of 2 and 2.
Mm.
And then we'd be coming back sometime between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. So we know when he sits on these
When he
bare
would
trees.
sit there.
So MOS was up and running back in those days? The
Back in 19
Maryland Ornithologic Society was.
Yes, because that's where, and I got the list of their different bird clubs.
And did you have to then petition them to become a part of their group, the Howard County Bird Club, or?
Gosh, I didn't ask anybody's permission. I must have told them that I was trying to organize a bird club because I have a feeling that they said, more power to you, let us know how it goes.
Okay. And at some point, the bird club was integrated into MOS.
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
From the very beginning, yes.
Okay.
And then there was only, I was vaguely around when various people in the bird club decided they wanted to join Audubon instead. And it didn't happen.
Oh.
It didn't happen, but I was aware that there were rumblings,
Well, it did happen. There was an Audubon Society in Howard County for at least quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was people who got bent out of shape over something that our board did.
Oh, okay.
And I don't remember details. I remember a couple of the people who were involved, and I don't know what eventually happened to the group. It may just not have been big enough that National Audubon wanted to support them.
So now National Audubon we have Central Maryland Group. In
Well,
Maryland.
then
There's a Central
okay, well,
Maryland
then
Audubon,
that's what it morphed into.
I guess. But it didn't lure enough people out of Howard County to
They didn't seem to.
No.
impact in the county.
No,
They're all very loyal. Always very, very loyal.
And so is there anybody that you keep in touch with from the old days? Or first of all, are there any of those folks still around?
Keep in touch. And when I go to funerals, I see Joe and Bob Soul.
Well,
And I've seen Marcy Krishnamurthy and Anu. I saw them several years ago when Mike died.
Okay. Neat. The
She-
Krishnamurthys.
Yeah,
I
they
haven't
were
seen
early
them.
members,
Uh-huh.
and she eventually ended up leaving trips, and so did her husband, and then unfortunately he was taken with cancer.
Hmm.
And she took care of him for a long time, and then he finally died, and she was able then to come back.
to
you
go
know.
birding.
Then she got involved with Mike of the Angry Bluebird, the Angry
Oh,
Bird.
And this,
That Mike Smith. That
Mike Smith.
took.
Okay.
okay.
Mhm.
That's Mike Smith back there. And he was a very close friend of Marcia's.
Was he a Howard County birder or Maryland birder?
I said he lived in Carroll County.
Okay.
He was an electrician who did photography.
Yeah, he did bird
on
photography, and
Uh-huh.
that one became
It did.
fairly famous.
It's really great, isn't it?
Yeah.
See that?
I have my own autographed copy that.
Oh, neat. Yeah.
So is there anything else that you remember about the early days of the club or impressions about the club that current members would be interested in hearing?
Mhm.
I think that it was the loyalty of those early members who
Mhm.
kept doing things. I mean,
Yeah.
can you imagine all of the things that Joe Solon has done
Oh,
since
she's
the very
incredible.
beginning? I mean,
I'm amazed that she isn't allowing herself. I mean, she's only in charge of the committee that's doing the celebration, but she's not one of the original people.
No, but she was a member. She was a member from, I'm sure, year one.
From almost the very beginning.
Uh-huh.
So,
But she wasn't one
and
of the
she
founding
absolutely,
10 or
she
12
stu- She
people.
studied dragonflies and
yeah.
ferns and wildflower, and she's put together all of these. She's
Yeah.
published
And
materials.
she's been this fantastic compiler of things, very much like a British county bird recorder. And
So this is an ode to Joe Solomon.
Well, she's over the years, she's probably done more to keep the club going than any one other person.
Well, except for Marty Chester. Marty
worked
worked pretty
worked a
hard.
lot.
She
Okay.
worked pretty hard.
And again, I've been kind of on the fringe.
And then Bob Solom, I think, has been very active in conservation. He and Joe both, but he,
Yeah.
he was.
And
of course,
Bob
is
is currently our
web-
webmaster.
Our webmaster, and have gotten into technology more than some of the rest of us have. So they've been, from the
Beginning.
very,
From the
very beginning, pretty
Yeah.
much. They've been really, really important in the club.
Then, of course, we had Bob Herndon and we had Larry Hood, both of them moved. And that was a big hole at the bird
Yeah.
club. But fortunately, they didn't move for like 5 or more years. So
Mhm.
they were around in the beginning to help us.
Stay
Both of them were big club field trip leaders,
wonderful.
excellent birders. And Bob Herndon was a photographer in addition to that. So he was taught bird photography.
So
Larry was a Patuxent wildlife research person. I don't remember what he did, but my feeling it might have been raptors was more of his specialty.
His specialty was raptors, but he started off as the wildlife person assigned to Chincoteague. And he was supposed to pick up people, what do you call people who capture animals and eat them when they don't have a license to do it?
Oh,
Poaching.
poaching.
He was
Okay.
supposed to do
That's
it
poaching.
when he first went
Oh,
down there.
my.
He was supposed to do wildlife kinds of things.
right.
And then all of a sudden they decided that they were going to make him a policeman
Oy.
and he had to go do poachers. And then when they moved him out of Chincoteague, he
Mhm.
worked for the government in some place in the same, he was still in wildlife, but they used to make him go after people who were
Poaching?
capturing falcons to export to Saudi Arabia or wherever they
Oh.
wanted falcons. And he was the person who was supposed to have the falcons, and he would make the overtures or was in cahoots with the people that wanted to buy. And then the minute that he got his hands on the money, then they'd rush in and arrest him.
Oh, I see.
But then unfortunately, I think,
He kept the money.
no, the people were so wealthy that when it went to court, they bribed the courts or that bought off the judges.
I see.
And so he was very frustrated because
Yeah.
he'd gone through all of this business to try to capture them. But he was a wonderful storyteller in addition. I mean, he could keep you going for half an hour with his.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that somebody was a good photographer.
you
So
know,
of course now we have digital photography, which makes it really easy. And then photographs before were just pain. But I noticed when I was looking in old records, there was a lot of drawings that people would draw, to document their sightings. They would document it by, drawing
By
pictures of birds.
sketch,
So you're an artist. You got beautiful drawings over here, paintings.
Yeah.
So were you sketching the birds that you
No,
saw back
not
then?
At that time, I hadn't started. I
No?
hadn't started on my
Mhm.
artistic career yet. No, there were just various people. I think Marty was sketching stuff.
Yeah. Well, just how do you document a rarity?
Well,
When it's hard to photograph or you're not anywhere around, a sketch was one of the most easily acceptable ways of documenting a rarity.
right.
So that was, very much encouraged.
And did you do that also? Did you have to?
Very little. I do not have good drawing skills,
Well, that's three of us at this table.
but
Thank God for cameras, right?
what I would do is get on the phone and call people if it was something relatively local.
So do we have any other memories that folks might be interested in from the beginning of the Bird Club or your involvement with the Bird Club?
I think it's interesting that we could all bring our children along on field trips.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think I can tell you that all of my children have bird feeders. And occasionally one will write and said, for instance, last year she was down at Sanibel Island that was just destroyed.
Mhm.
And she sent me an email about all the birds that she'd seen on Sanibel Island, so that even if she isn't a member of a formal bird club, somehow, it's been imparted. And when I go to my kids' houses, I always see bird feeders, and my mother gave me our first bird feeder.
That's
And that
fantastic.
was the first thing that got me interested in birds. She said you put it right outside the window, and then of course the birds would come.
So David said he started birding at age 8 in Kansas.
Yeah.
And you started birding at what age do you think?
26.
You said your mom encouraged you to.
Yes, I got married and got my first house, 26, I think.
Uh-huh.
And my mother came with a bird feeder and we hung it. And then she came with a suet feeder and we hung it. And we were gone from there on in. That we were caught.
Right.
Very exciting. It's nice. It's a good story. Both of you started because your parents encouraged you to look at birds.
And one of the things I've been happy about is we've had a couple of families who have had kids on field trips more recently.
Mm-hmm.
I found a couple of people in the club who are willing to take kids on them on the Christmas count, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And I'm really happy with that because these are, the ones that I've come in contact with are very sharp kids and ones that you're happy to have get hooked.
Yeah, we used to go to Bombay Hook, and the Krishnamurtis would bring Anu along, and I'd bring Sandra along.
Mm-hmm.
And when we, while we were off birding, the two little girls would play happily, and we'd have our lunch, all of us together lunch, and then, made it a much more pleasant day for the little girls than just being, with our friends.
And magically the girls started looking at the birds also.
Oh, yes.
Do we have any other recollections that?
Well, the other thing I think about birding is that I think it starts you on a respect for nature. And that from that respect of the beauty of birds and the beauty of nature,
Mhm.
I think it then creeps out so that you don't drop your Kleenex or your napkin or the top of your Coke bottle on the ground. That it leads to people appreciating the earth
Right.
in a way that other people who never leave their houses in the city appreciate earth.
Well, so we're going to see you both at the 50th anniversary. Is that correct? In 2 weeks?
Yeah.
That'll be
Yeah.
exciting. And I think this will probably end up being on the website and end up being maybe a clip of this being shown at the anniversary. Would be very nice. Respect for nature is
I
probably
saw
the
someplace that I had agreed to be part of. I had agreed to organize the telephone tree for rare birds, and remembering someone I was telling about this sort of system for rare birds and so on. Wow, that's a whole different subculture.
That's right. It is
sort of, yeah.
Yeah, you had a central line you called into, and
Me. And then I called some people who then called
right.
more people and
We
spread. So it was
each
really
have like
the
3 people to call.
communication.
Uh-huh.
If he called me, I'd call 3 people, and they had 3 people to call.
Yeah,
And that was the way we got.
that was the
Spread the
telephone.
word.
Yeah.
I think
you-
it sounds like we've exhausted all the thoughts about the bird.
Well, I don't know what else. But as I only looked through the first 3 years, and I know why I wasn't more intensely involved in bird club activities.
Same reason why you had trouble scheduling today, because you have a lot on your plate.
There's a fair amount on the
Early
plate,
years, you
and I
were
was
leading trips all the time.
So you have a different recollection than David's
Yes,
recollection.
You were leading trips all the time. We
well.
were
I
very
led.
grateful.
It does say that I led some.
You led a
Mhm.
lot, and you were the best warbler
Oh,
identified.
okay.
Absolutely.
Well, this is good to hear. This is good to know.
Okay, thank you.
Because David seems to be a bit humble about what his involvement was.
Well, no, I would lead field trips, and the banding that I did, I mean, I was already a field birder and had a little experience in some interesting locations.
Mm-hmm.
I moved here from Florida, so Central Florida.
I heard Kansas.
I grew up, graduated from college in Kansas, 3 years in Michigan, 14 months in Central Florida, and then Maryland.
In Maryland, you've been here ever since.
So there was a bit of variety back there, and yeah, working with birders quite a bit, and then getting hooked up with the banding meant that detail observation skills got much more highly developed.
Yeah.
You know what did that for me? Developed that for me?
No, I'd like to know. Ah.
Painting increased my visual acuity in a way that it was just really interesting to me, that it was just easier to identify something after I had started painting. Because when you paint, you have to have such very intense focus on every little detail.
Right.
And it also is a physical part of the brain as well as visual mental. And the more places you put something in a brain, the clearer it becomes.
Yeah, that's true.
I work with that as a music teacher all the time. It's oral, visual, and understanding, and physical. And the physical is really quite important.
David, that I taught children with learning disability for 20 years. And this is exactly what I was doing.
Okay.
So what are you doing now?
I'm a licensed acupuncturist. I graduated in 1990.
Mm.
And during the years that I went to school for 2 years, and I was setting up my practice, I gave up everything. I gave up birding, I gave up painting, I gave up absolutely everything. And I did nothing but devote myself to getting through school. And I was already 55 years old when I started.
All right. Well, I think as far as the bird club goes, I don't know if I have anything.
I don't know what else.
I don't have anything else.
I would have to go through more newsletters to be able to document what I did. My filing system is, like I said, basically fairly non-existent. I'll have all that stuff, but I'd have to work really hard to unearth it. And I haven't taken the time to do it.
I'll bet you led a field trip, if not every month, every other month for the first few years that we were going.
This is one of the big tales, other than the fact of how this was birthed, with your involvement in getting this off the ground. The next thing I've learned is that David has a bad memory when it comes to his involvement with the club. And David had a lot of involvement, leading trips, which is really what gets a lot of people to come to join a group like this.
Well, he's such an excellent leader. He's a very good teacher. And then, not everybody's a good teacher.
Yeah.
It takes a great deal of skill to be a good teacher.
And patience.
And patience,
Yeah.
absolutely.